Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Net Zero Energy Building Knowledge Series. The Net Zero Energy Building Knowledge Series is a platform for industry to share expertise and showcase projects, technology, products, and ideas that fuel the discussion on building energy efficiency and grow the engagement for investors. The initiative is supported by METRI, funded by USAID. METRI is an acronym for Market Integration and Transformation for Energy Efficiency. And you can know more about this program on our website, metri.edsglobal.com. I'm Prachi. I'll be moderating today's informative session. Today's webinar session is on the EDGE Net Zero Carbon Certification. EDGE is a green building rating system by IFC that's focused on making buildings more resource efficient in emerging markets. So we know that there's a growing trend of rapid urbanization in emerging economies, including in India. That brings it with it the threats of rising energy demand, waste, water shortage, and increased greenhouse gas emissions. Green buildings, however, can be a part of that solution. World over, there's a growing movement towards carbon buildings. So the EDGE rating system is an innovation by IFC. There's guidelines to reduce building carbon footprints in a fast, easy, and affordable way. This webinar will introduce you to the EDGE Net Zero Carbon Certification. Today, our leading green building specialists from IFC, Atif Syed and Shruti Narayan. So let me introduce them and tell you a bit more about them. Atif Syed is the technical lead for IFC's Green Building Program across Asia. In China, Indonesia, Vietnam, Philippines, India, Mongolia, and Ghana, he's supporting local teams on mandatory government regulations, voluntary certification systems, and investments with green building developers. Atif has supported mandatory green building codes for 7 national and local governments and facilitated green building code compliance for over 18 million meters square of built space. Shruti Narayan leads IFC's Green Building Program in South Asia, leveraging IFC's EDGE Green Building certification. She has over 17 years of global work experience specializing in energy efficiency and sustainability. So without further ado, let's begin today's session. We'll start with a presentation followed by a Q&A session. And you can send us your questions in through the chat box. So over to you, Shruti.
Thank you, Prachi, and thank you once again, everyone, for joining us today evening on this interesting discussion that we are hoping to have. So just quickly on who we are. So IFC, Atif and I belong to the International Finance Corporation, which is a part of the World Bank Group. So started in 1944, the World Bank Group has 5 members, and we've been working, we have about 189 member countries. So it's important to note that how it's a very unique global partnership that's sort of being supported by several countries across the world, focused on a developmental impact. The 2 things that we focus on as an institution is looking at how we can reduce poverty and increase prosperity. We work through the public sector, which is government. So our sister organizations, IBRD and IDA, work with the government, providing loans, supporting, how the government can structure programs that can, help in alleviating poverty. And IFC, MEGA, and I see SID work on looking at the private sector, because we believe it's very important for the private sector to have a role to play in the developmental challenges of the world. Now, IFC, where we belong, is completely focused on investment, financing, and technical assistance to the private sector. And a key sort of a focus of the developmental challenges that we believe is climate change. So as we all know, and this is nothing new, I think everybody on the call probably is well aware that buildings contribute significantly to climate change. We are in an environment, we've been reading about climate change. There has also been now, I mean, we're all locked down due to public health crisis, and a lot of it is being analyzed to be directly impacted by, how we have impacted, our ecological balance to sort of create this kind of a, imbalance where we are now getting impacted by climate change. So green building is a key focus for IFC, and both Atif and I belong to the global green building team, and we have been working very closely on several aspects of how we can, sort of scale up green buildings across the developing countries. Now, this has to be an approach that has to be integrated. So we have a 4-part strategy as a part of our program. The first one, in the yellow, is looking at investment and advisory for banks. As I had mentioned earlier, that IFC's primary goal or primary mandate is investments in the private sector. So we work very closely with financial institutions, other banking partners in creating and developing products that can actually scale up green buildings. So we believe in leveraging financing for green buildings, because as we all know, that financing and capital flows play a very critical part in how a market can get created. The second thing that we do, which is very complementary to financing, is working with regulators and, building real estate directly through our own balance sheet. And so, collectively, this is kind of what our strategy has been. Now, one of the things that we believe that when you are looking at green buildings, it's very important to be able to quantify the impacts, right? Because working through financial institutions and, in creating instruments, we realize that most clients and, institutions want a disclosure on how the buildings are doing. So, and we're going to go into the detail of this, but IFC then created EDGE, which stands for Excellence in Design for Greater Efficiency, which was basically an application which would provide, and it's probably the only application worldwide that actually has a dashboard included that gives you your impact in terms of how much energy you're using, how much water you're using, the kind of paybacks you may have, that helps you in reporting back and being able to not only report back to your financiers, but also to communicate with your clients and your stakeholders like consumers. So EDGE sort of is a pivot that we use for doing other work and facilitating the dialogues with other stakeholders. And a key thing for EDGE is that we wanted to create something that's scalable and it's voluntary and it's completely available online, which my colleague Atif will actually walk you through it and how it works. But it basically works as an app that's available online for anyone to access, and then a certification system that's third-party verified. So coming to just, kind of that was what we've done globally. Now, reflecting that global 4-pronged strategy, we have been very active in India in the last, 4 to 5 years since EDGE was launched. We have been working on policy. We have worked with, the states of Maharashtra and Karnataka and Tamil Nadu, looking at what kind of policies and incentives can be structured for facilitating the growth of green buildings. We had developed the first of its kind policy with the Karnataka, government called the Karnataka Green Building Incentive Policy that looks at comprehensively the new buildings and existing buildings and structuring incentives around it. It's actually waiting for cabinet approval currently. So we work a lot with policy makers, and we're also doing a lot of capacity building of policy makers, for it's important for them to understand the importance of green building. The second is, we are working, of course, like, IFC's primary mandate being investment, we work very closely with the private sector. In the last 3 years, we had identified affordable housing, warehouses, and hotels as 3 sectors that we were focusing on. And we developed some very key clients, some significant portfolio clients that actually develop green affordable housing, green warehouses, and green hotels, and were able to actually demonstrate the value proposition of this. And we have since then been working with our clients to actually really look at this sector even further, these three sectors. And in affordable housing, we did some very extensive studies in trying to see what kind of value proposition can it be, does green cost more, etc. We have also facilitated some investments in these three sectors, and we're always working with even banks to see how we can structure new financial instrument to facilitate green properties through investments. The third is education. We are recently, so IFC has developed a global green building education curriculum focused on universities and educational institutions, primarily architecture, but we're it's also applicable to anyone who's actually keen on understanding green building. So several engineering colleges and construction colleges have also been interested in it. We are currently working on launching that in India through doing training of the trainers of faculty, and then seeing how that curriculum can be incorporated into the coursework to actually develop and the next generation of professionals, because it's important to have people, professionals who can actually support this growth of green buildings in India. The last is, of course, awareness. We all know that even though the green building dialogue has been going on in India for the last over a decade, but the penetration of green buildings in India probably stands at 5%. And there are several clients that still come through with the understanding that green building can cost up to 10% more, or they probably don't even know what green building means. So a key focus of our program has been awareness. We are working through diverse sectors, so not only the policy makers or the private sector like developers, but also consumers, consultants, architects, engineers, academicians, to actually kind of do an ecosystem awareness of the value proposition of green buildings. We do several webinars, we do in-person activities, we have developed several collaterals, and most of the research work that we do is actually available online. We have a website through which we disseminate this. So a key part of our work is awareness, and even webinars like this is creating awareness around what EDGE is, what is green buildings, and how one can actually do them and implement them with not much effort, and make them actually a part of business as usual activity of delivering buildings in India. So with that overview of green buildings, we actually also developed the first of its kind Sustainable Housing Leadership Consortium about 3 years back. We got together 5 top developers in India and 2 financial institutions. So in this very powerful photo, actually, you will see that we have the CEOs of Mahindra Properties, Godrej, Tata Realty, and Value Budget Housing, and Shapoorji Pallonji. So we got them together because one of the things that IFC and the World Bank, we believe our strength is the power of convening. We can actually bring together diverse stakeholders to actually have discussions on a common topic and a dialogue, which often really helps in creating integrated solutions. So SHLC was one of the first of its kind attempt in the world to actually bring together 5 sort of competing organizations to talk about one particular topic, and that was green homes. And SHLC, all the 5 signatories, which also included Punjab National Bank, their housing finance arm, and HDFC, which is one of the largest housing financing companies in India, to come and sign a charter where they said that they will make 100% of their homes green. They're going to work together on guiding policies for sustainable housing in India, and also identifying new technologies for reducing the incremental costs of going green, and also develop a body of knowledge that can be disseminated through this platform. So we've been working through this platform. if with the interest of time, I mean, I'm just going to not go into the detail, but if anybody is interested, please feel free to reach out to us. We'll be happy to share. We have identified some new technologies, which we can talk about, with whoever is interested later. This is just kind of giving you a brief overview of the policy work. We have, we shortlisted several policies, and we actually evaluated policies globally and in Asia in specific to see what kind of policies can help in green building scale up. We have been recommending policies to, states, and we have a couple of edge incentives already in place, which also includes, I mean, as there are several IGBC and GRIHA and LEED incentives already in place in India. Now, the idea is to look at all this combined and see how we can actually scale up green building. So while the stage has been set with all this knowledge, the platform is ready, and now we need actually people to come together, and especially the ones that have joined this webinar who are actually in the building sector and aware of buildings, to actually come together and understand how we can actually implement some of these strategies. With that, I will hand it over to my colleague Atif to take us through the presentation on net zero and give an overview of EDGE.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. This is Atif Sayed. I'm an architect by training, and I'm sure many of the people on this webinar are either architects or deal with architects. And we all know that architects love balance, balance in symmetry, in form, and shape. But there is another kind of balance that goes beyond aesthetics, which talks about the balance of resources. Resources that go into a building, into making and running a building, and also resources that can be produced by the building itself. So we can call these the output and the input. And unfortunately, the focus has been mostly on the output, not so much on the input side of this equation. But that's what is being tried, is being changed now with the net zero energy definition. So let's go into that a little bit. Conventionally, when you have a building that's just using energy and water and materials and not producing any of their own, that's what we kind of call a conventional building. But if we can manage to produce energy, if we can manage to produce water meaning either recycle it or save it from rainwater, and similarly energy as well, you can produce through solar and other means. If you can balance it out, then that can be a net zero building. And if you can increase your input more than the output, then that can be a net positive building. Now, depending on which resource you're talking about, the building could be a net zero energy, where we could be talking about site energy or source energy or the cost of energy. It could be a net zero water building, or it could be a net zero carbon building, which is what we are focusing on at IFC. And the term that we are starting to use is zero carbon, just for simplicity's sake. So if you look at these definitions, I know there's a lot of different definitions out there, a lot of different terminology is being used. But let's start from the square that's right in the middle, which says nearly zero energy building. So these are typically buildings that maybe have not achieved parity in terms of the energy being produced from the site, from the building. It's not matching the amount of energy that's being used in the building itself. Then you can go to the next level, which is net zero energy building. This is where the parity has been achieved. And typically we see these buildings are suitable for low density, low rise buildings. And that's because you have a lot of roof area available, you have site area available in these low density areas, and you can install solar PV. But as you move to higher density spaces like city centers, the roof area is quite minimal, and it has to compete with other functions. So it becomes difficult to install a lot of solar PV in those kind of buildings. And that's where a net zero carbon definition really helps, because now this definition allows the building owner to actually buy credits or buy renewable energy off-site, which is being produced somewhere else. So that's one avenue where they can still contribute, they can still qualify themselves as a net zero building, but without having to go through those challenges of a smaller roof size. And this is where edge zero carbon definition really lies, at the net zero carbon building. The next step beyond that is net zero carbon building, including embodied carbon, which is the carbon that's used for manufacturing the materials. Now, EDGE does quantify embodied carbon of construction materials, but we're not using it for the net zero calculations. So the definition of zero carbon buildings that we are using is fairly simple. We're saying this a building that is highly efficient, energy efficient, and that produces either on-site energy or procures off-site energy, which is carbon-free and renewable, to meet the building operations energy consumption annually. So on an annual basis, if you're buying or producing enough energy to offset that demand, this is a net zero carbon building. So stepping back a little bit, why is this being done and what's the importance of zero carbon? As part of the Paris Agreement a couple of years ago at the COP21, nearly 200 countries had agreed to phase out fossil fuels, and construction sector is one of those priority areas that they had identified. So with that in mind, a lot of organizations have started to come together, and two long-term goals have been set by a variety of groups, and some of which I'll mention in the later slides. The two goals are, firstly, that all new buildings should be built meeting the zero carbon standards by 2030. That means within the next 10 years, any new construction that's being built after 2030 should be zero carbon. And similarly, all buildings, new and existing, should achieve zero carbon standards by 2050, meaning the existing buildings, the older buildings, have to be retrofitted as well to meet the zero carbon standard. And that's a more difficult task. That's why it's been kind of postponed for by another 20 years, so that the technology would become advanced enough, and maybe the market would be prepared, the manufacturers would be ready by then to do this. But the progress has already started, and what we are doing with Edge is one of the foundations for that. So we've partnered with various organizations globally, including World Resources Institute, Architecture 2030, which is kind of a pioneer think tank on zero carbon and net zero energy buildings, and of course, World Green Building Council. And in India as well, we are partnering with a lot of different organizations and trying to make this possible, because this is not something that can be done individually. Everyone has to kind of pitch in together to make this possible. And out of all those definitions that I had mentioned, zero carbon is kind of being seen as the global metric now, primarily because we're talking about climate change. And climate change occurs because there is excess carbon emissions in the environment. So we're trying to measure that and minimize that through this metric. Zerocarbonbuildings.org. This is an initiative that includes United Nations, it includes World Green Building Council, World Resources Institute, and many others. And collectively, we're trying to increase the adoption of the zero carbon standards throughout the world, especially in the developing countries like India, where construction is still happening at a very fast rate. We have now 3 different levels of EDGE certification. When we had started EDGE, we just had one, which was EDGE certified, which meant that the building had to achieve at least a 20% energy, water, and material saving as compared to the local baseline. What we've recently added is an EDGE advanced level, which requires at least 40% energy saving in addition to the 20% in water and materials. And the third level is the zero carbon, which requires carbon neutrality. That means 100% of the operational carbon emissions have to be offset either on-site or off-site. So I'll go into more detail on this. But the EDGE software, those of you who are not familiar with it, is an online software that's available for anyone to use globally at no charge. It's available at edgebuildings.org, and I'll try to demonstrate that software today. Then we have set a standard, which is 20% improvement above the local baseline. It's important that we are comparing against local baselines and not some international or arbitrary baseline. So if you're building a hotel in New Delhi, your baseline will be typical hotels in New Delhi of that sort, of that star category. And then the third aspect is the verification, where we have developed a very strong network of experts, auditors, and certifiers globally who can go out and check whether these buildings are really achieving that standard or not. So I mentioned the website, and I'll just quickly go through to the next one. So right now, the building types that we have available are pretty much covering the entire gamut of residential and commercial buildings, with the exception of heavy manufacturing. So we have light industrial, but we don't have heavy industrial buildings. And we have homes, apartments, hospitals, hotels, offices, etc. So any of those buildings, whether they are new or they are existing buildings, they can be evaluated through the software and certified as well. And the standard, the minimum standard, which is the EDGE certified standard, requires 20% savings on all three categories: on energy, on water, and materials. So you cannot skip one of those, or you cannot trade between those sectors. So with this, the new categories that we've added, the new levels in EDGE certification, now you require 20% minimum savings for water and materials, regardless of the certification level. But if you have to go to EDGE Advanced, you need to go at least 40% on energy. If you go to zero carbon, you need at least 40% on energy, which means that EDGE Advanced is kind of a prerequisite for zero carbon. The other big difference is in these levels or certifications is that EDGE Certified and EDGE Advanced are design certifications. These are issued at the time of design and post-construction, but zero carbon is an operational certificate, meaning it is only awarded after at least 1 year of operation, when the building owner is able to provide some documentation on actual energy consumption and production. So on our website, if you go to our website and click on projects page, you will be able to see all the projects that have been registered, have been certified, and the level that they have achieved if they've gone beyond the basic certification level. So EDGE Advanced and EDGE Zero Carbon projects are highlighted. And then there are case studies. If you click on any of those pictures, you can access more information on them. So zero carbon certification is slightly different, because first you have to get an EDGE Advanced certification during the design stage, and then you operate for 1 year, and you document all the information on energy that's either procured or produced, and the energy bills as well for the site. And the other requirement is you need to have at least 1 year of 75% occupancy. And 75% occupancy is as compared to 75% of the normal occupancy. For example, if a hotel is normally 70% occupied only, this would be 75% of that 70%. So roughly about 50% occupancy for that hotel is required. And then once you collect those bills, you submit them, and the certifier reviews, and if they're matching, then you can achieve the zero certification either with on-site or off-site energy. So in terms of designing zero carbon buildings, this is the philosophy that we use and we encourage others to use as well, which is kind of the hierarchy of decision making in energy efficient design. First is be lean. That means just use less energy, create less demand for energy and other resources as well through passive design features such as daylighting, such as natural ventilation, such as use of right kind of glass and shading. And then once you've reduced your demand, be clean by providing that demand through efficient systems, efficient cooling systems, lighting, electrical systems, etc. And then once you've provided that demand, now you need the energy to run those equipment, and you can get that energy from on-site renewable or off-site. Off-site meaning being the last option for this. So and typically we've seen the cost goes down. On the left you can see energy efficient design is usually the lowest cost item. Passive design sometimes can actually save you incremental cost as well. And typically as you go down, the cost for the project increases. So we encourage paying more attention at the top, right from the beginning of the design, and then try to add in those other elements as you go along. So let me now switch to the Edge demo, and I'll try to share my screen. So in the meanwhile, if there are any questions so far, please put them on the chat box. Okay, I hope you can see my screen. So this is the Edge app. So you can go to app.edgebuildings.com and you'll be able to see the application. I won't go into a lot of details of the application itself. You can play around. It's fairly simple to use, and it has all those building types listed here. What I'll try to do quickly is demonstrate how you can actually make a building zero carbon. So let's try to do it for an office building. So I've selected an office building, and I'll select a location. Let's take a New Delhi. So you select India. And Delhi. So let's keep the default information here. So let's say it's a 5,000 square meter building for 3 floors, or let's make it 10 floors. 10 floors and 2 basement, and it has just a regular layout. Okay, and it has air conditioning. So without doing anything to the building, just using our baseline specifications, meaning the typical construction practices, this project will consume roughly about 192 kilowatt hours per square meter of energy per year, which equates to roughly about 951,000 rupees per month. Now, this website, the application provides you an opportunity to increase the efficiency of this building by selecting these measures on the left. And it's a big list of measures. I'll try to select a few, and the impact will be seen in this bar on the right. So let's take the first one, which is a passive design measure for reducing the window to wall ratio. So if you manage to reduce the window to wall ratio, let's say on the west, we put it down to 10% and east as well, and let the rest remain at 30%. So we've already cut down 10% energy just by that one measure, and actually that saves some incremental cost as well, because we've reduced the amount of glass in the building, which is more costly than wall material. Now, if you put in some shading as well, and you can do a lot more with the shading by clicking on the calculator and adjusting the depth of the shading, etc. But just by putting some additional shading, we've added another 7%. What if we choose a high performance glass with a low SHGC? And we are at 21% saving just with these design measures, passive design measures, and still at an incremental cost that's negative. So you can see that this has turned green, and it says it meets EDGE energy standard, which means we are above the 20% mark now. And if we finish the rest of the requirements, we can meet the EDGE certified level. But we want to go beyond that. We want to get to net zero energy. So let's do some more improvement here. Let's try to install a water cooled chiller with fairly high efficiency. Let's take it up to 6. So gone up to 25%. Let's try to do something with lighting as well. Maybe install efficient lamps, which is typically LEDs in all the areas, indoor and outdoor, and occupancy sensors in bathrooms. And we've cut it down now to 39% almost. Let's do a little bit more. Let's put maybe daylighting controls as well. And now we've crossed 40% mark, and you can see that it says EDGE advanced. That means we've met that criteria for EDGE advanced. And as soon as you go beyond the 40% mark, this window pops up here, which shows the carbon emissions for this building and any offsets that we might be doing. So the offsets appear on the left, the emissions appear on the right. So far with this building, we have 352 tons of CO2 equivalent emissions per year, and we've not offsetting anything so far. So now to achieve zero carbon, there are two options. Either we go solar, on-site solar, or we buy offsets. So let's try all of those options. So let's just first take solar PV. Now we want to have 100% of solar PV. 100 because we've already reduced 40%, and we want to cover the remaining 60% through solar PV. So let's put a little higher than 100 here. Okay, so that's one way. Either you get through solar, but that's a fairly costly item, because now you see the incremental cost has gone up, although the paybacks are still pretty good, 3 years. But that could sometimes be problematic, especially if you don't have enough roof space available, especially in tall buildings. That could be difficult. The other option could be if you go offsite and you say, okay, I'm going to procure. In some places you can do that, in some markets, procure all my electricity from a renewable source, or I pay somebody for my carbon offsets. Now that somebody cannot be anybody. We have clearly defined in our protocol who that could be, where you're buying your carbon credits from, and that has to be documented very well. And once you do that, then now you're again able to match your carbon emissions versus the offsets. And if you achieve 20% savings in water and materials, this could become an EDGE net zero building or zero carbon building. So I'll stop there. This website has a lot of information. If you've not tried, please do try, and you can actually click on the measures. Like if you want to know more about carbon offset, you can click here, and then it'll open up some tooltips. And if you click on more info, then it'll open up the website with the PDF, which has a lot of other information available. So this is actually one of those net zero energy buildings. And if you missed this, there was a very interesting webinar by Wolfgang Kessling from Transsolar, who worked on this project. This is, I think, one of the biggest zero energy or net zero energy building, especially in tropical climates that I've seen, and it's an excellent example. So please try to find that link on the presentation. And you can also do an online search for more on this project. So now, when we do the EDGE app analysis, and the final step of the whole process is getting the certificate. A regular certificate for EDGE projects looks like this, where you have the individual savings, energy, water, and material savings listed on the front with the name of the project. And at the back, it lists all the measures that were used to achieve that saving. So it becomes like a awareness raising tool as well if you put this in your building lobby or somewhere. If you go to an EDGE zero carbon certification, that looks slightly different. The zero carbon certificate looks more like this, where there are more details on the actual energy demand and the actual energy produced, either on-site or off-site. So remember, this is after 1 year of occupancy. So that data is now available. And it also lists the carbon offset. So this is actually a very nice information to have, especially if you are looking at carbon reporting somewhere. And in the future, carbon trading, when it becomes commonplace, this could be extremely valuable information. The certification workflow for EDGE projects and zero carbon projects is quite similar. So the first few phases are exactly the same for all certification, where you use the EDGE application to do an analysis, submit the design. The design is audited by an auditor, and then a preliminary certification is issued showing this design is meeting the EDGE standard. And then once the building is completed, the auditor goes on site, checks the specifications, and based on that, the final certificate is issued. If this project achieves more than 40% energy saving, automatically an EDGE advanced certificate is issued. This is a lifetime certificate which does not need to be renewed anytime. Now, when you go into the operation, and 1 year after occupancy, with all the data collected, the building owner can approach the certifier and register for EDGE zero carbon certificate, which is an additional certificate. And they will there was a very small fee that has to be paid because there is no audit required here. It is only a review by the certifier. Once that document is submitted and checked, then the final zero carbon certificate is issued. This zero carbon certificate needs to be renewed based on where they got their offsets or energy from. If it's on-site, then it's 4 years for renewal. If it's off-site, then it's 2 years for the renewal, because that can change over time. We also provide a carbon calculator where all the calculations can be done, converting all the fuels used in the building into GHG emissions and all the offsets and renewable energy again into GHG emissions, and then trying to balance those two, compare those two. In terms of roles and responsibilities, the only difference in zero carbon is the EDGE auditor is not required. It goes directly from the applicant to the certifier. One case study I had mentioned earlier, this is another one. This is actually the first EDGE zero carbon certification. And again, it's a fairly large building, which is kind of unusual. It's an office building. I don't remember the area, but I think it's like 12 or 15 floors in Manila, and it achieved zero carbon emissions with the help of off-site renewable energy credits, and they achieved 45% energy efficiency on site. So this is an operational building now. The other that I just mentioned was the Singapore example. Again, an excellent example, especially for tropical climates. So I would highly encourage anybody interested to learn more should look at this example. Shruti had mentioned earlier that we work with green finance, either from our own side or with other partners and local finance institutions. For those investments, 20% is still the criteria to qualify it as green. We're not requiring all the projects to get to zero carbon. That's still going to be some ways out. So 20% still remains our criteria. However, we know that a lot of international investors are looking at zero carbon now with a lot of interest. So there might be more funding available very soon for these kind of projects. So I'll end with this call to action and kind of throw this challenge to you on what you can do within your organization. If you're with an architectural institute, or whether you're a consultant, or you're a developer, or you're an engineer, what can you do to adopt these standards? And it could be with EDGE, it could be with other systems. What I think achieving those standards is really important. And as I said earlier, unless we do it all together, this is not going to work out. So we are here to help you. If we can be of any assistance in raising awareness, in making the market understand, in working with policymakers wherever possible, we would be very interested to discuss that with you. So please do let us know, and where EDGE and IFC can support your efforts in zero carbon update. So that's all I had today, and we have some time, so I think we can take some questions.
Thanks, Atif, and thanks, Shruti. That was a very insightful presentation, and we truly appreciate the very streamlined approach towards zero carbon that EDGE is providing, and also the dashboard. I think with those ready metrics, it's such a good tool for our designers to design towards zero carbon as well as present the business case for sustainability. So thanks a lot for the presentation, and let's jump into the questions. We are having a lot of questions coming in. So I'll just read them out to you.
Yes, please.
Great.
I can see the last question. Is the software free to use? Maybe I'll just take that while you look at the other ones. So yes, the software is completely free to use. The only requirement is that you register yourself once, and that registration is also free of charge. We know a lot of people are actually using the software to influence, to kind of guide their decision making during early design, including students and architects. So feel free to use for that. There is no requirement to report or anything on just the use of the software. The certification obviously has a cost.
Great. So there are a few questions coming in about the baseline criteria. So could you just explain, like, what is the baseline for net zero carbon?
Sure. So the baseline for EDGE certification is the same as so same across the board, if regardless of the level of certification, whether it's zero carbon or just EDGE certified, and that baseline is representing typical construction in that market for that type. So as I gave an example earlier, if you are evaluating an office building in New Delhi, your comparison will be with a baseline that is representative of typical office buildings in Delhi being constructed in the last 3 years or so. And that's based on surveys and consultations with experts that we've done across the board. And so we have baseline data for over 160 countries right now, and I believe 65 cities in India. And we're going to expand it to all the countries in the world in the next few months.
Right. So, following that, there's another question about, does the monetary value vary for different sites or different countries? For example, in Australia or India, would the monetary valuation also change?
Monetary valuation?
Right.
Did you,
Yeah,
you mean
that.
in terms of the incremental cost and the savings, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, it does. So the website has data on the local tariffs and cost data as well. The cost data is more generic. So for example, we have cost on different lamp types. We have cost data on solar PV, on insulation material, on water fixtures, etc. So there is that cost data in there, which is sort of generic, but the local data, which includes utility tariffs and construction cost, that's kind of very well defined and documented there. So yes, it is customized to the location.
Right. And there's another question about whether existing buildings can also use the EDGE system to achieve zero carbon. And
Yes.
IFC provide funding for these kind of buildings. It would, right?
So so the two parts of the question, if I understood correctly. The first is, are existing buildings also can be used for certification? So yes, existing buildings can go for certification. Uh, the baseline that's used for existing buildings is the same that we use for new building, but the requirement changes slightly, because if the building is already built, that means there is no additional material, construction material, going to be used for that building. And if that's the case, then we don't count materials section. The criteria for materials is kind of removed, and you're only evaluated for energy performance and water performance for those existing buildings. I think the second part of the question was investment. I didn't completely catch the question, but on investments, investment and EDGE certification are kind of supporting each other, but they're not directly linked. Meaning, if you get IFC investment, that does not necessarily mean that you get EDGE certification as well. You still have to achieve those standards and apply and go through the process. And conversely, if you get EDGE certification, that does not guarantee that you get IFC investments as well. It does help, but it is not a guarantee. There are so many other factors that go into investment decisions. So if they are all met and satisfied with, then there is a possibility.
Right. The next question is, what is the auditor's role in the EDGE certification?
The auditor's role is in two phases. The first phase is during the design process. After the design is done and submitted for evaluation, the auditor reviews the design drawings and documentation to make sure that the information entered into the EDGE app is matching the design drawings, meaning they will achieve that level of efficiency that has been evaluated through the app. So that's the first part of EDGE auditor's work. And then once the building is completed and constructed, the auditor does a walkthrough audit of the site and checks items that can be physically checked, like cooling efficiency, like water flow from the faucets, like glass that has been installed, and so on and so forth. And then based on auditor's report, the certifier issues the certificate. And for India, GBCI is the certification partner. So they are the ones who actually issue the final and the preliminary certifications.
Right. So I think we have time just for one last question. There are many more questions. We could email them to you, and then you can take it forward. But here's a very interesting question, and it's can we skip the EDGE certification and go straight for zero carbon if the building in question is a LEED, IGBC, and well-certified building?
Sorry, I missed the first part of the question. Do you mind repeating it?
Sure.
Or if you type it in the chat box.
Sure. Let me just read it out once more. So can a building that is LEED and well certified go straight for zero carbon certification?
Can a building that's been LEED or well certified go straight for zero carbon certification? So
that's right.
So the way LEED certifies buildings is slightly different from the way that EDGE has adopted. So EDGE is a very kind of a quantified and system where we are not really awarding any points, and where the points can be kind of traded off between different measures. So EDGE has a minimum requirement for energy, minimum requirement for water, and minimum for material. And these are performance requirements. So the EDGE does not say you have to install an occupancy sensor for lights. EDGE says you do whatever measure works best for you, as long as you meet this level of performance. So because of that difference in approach, it's hard for us to very quickly evaluate whether a project that's been certified by another rating system, whether it can be directly be translated over to EDGE or not. That's the current scenario. Hopefully, and we're working very closely with LEED, US GBC and GBCI are very strong partners with us. So we are working with them and other rating systems as well to kind of unify at least the way we work, so we can translate and we can compare projects across the board. So in the future, this might be possible, but right now you have to go through the EDGE certification system and get your EDGE advanced certification before you get zero carbon.
Right. Thanks a lot. I think we had a great Q&A session and a great presentation. We are quite close to the end of today's session. But before that, just a couple of announcements. Next week, we at EDS will be launching the Climate Responsive Design Certificate Program. This program will give you the skills and knowledge to design contemporary buildings that are climate responsive. And the curriculum involves software tools to identify design strategies, analytical techniques, as well as communication skills to tell the story effectively. If this is something you're interested in, please check out the link that's going to appear in your chat box now. The next webinar in the series is scheduled on the 22nd of May. It's on accessible and affordable green housing. This is going to be a very interesting session for architects, consultants, as well as developers. So do tune in. This month's NZEB newsletter will be out soon. It's full of updates, news, and also learning resources for achieving net zero in your project. You can also view previous webinars on the NZEB India YouTube channel. Like we mentioned, Wolfgang Kessling's webinar about SD4, which is a net zero building as well. That's also up there on YouTube channel. So do check it out. And lastly, you please sign up for subscribe to the NZEB portal to stay aware of all our latest events, to access the Knowledge Center, which is full of case studies, learning resources, and more about Intensity. And so that was today's session. I hope you had a great learning experience. A recording of today's session will be uploaded for everyone to see on our YouTube channel. Thanks everyone for dialing in.